ladder only. The moment the third and very important player comes in into the being, that is the government authority in terms of the inspection, when he makes a lot of observation, then straight away the effect of non-compliances during his inspection can bring the business down through the ceiling. So this is just a pictorial representation of how important the vendor compliance is. When I say vendor compliances, what are the labor acts, labor laws that would be applicable in terms of the contract labor compliances? I've just grouped it into the five different groups, starting with the regulatory. When I say regulatory, if you're working in a factory, if you're heading the factory, or if you're manager in the factory, Factories Act, Shops and Establishment Act would be applicable for the offices and establishment. Then the building and other constructions worker regulation of employment and service condition in terms of the greenfield construction projects, Mines Act and the Plantation Act. These are all the regulatory. What it talks about, this regulatory act, it generally talks about the permission that is required to be taken to run the factory or shops and establishment. We call it as a factory license or RC under the SND Act, and it mostly talks about the certain safety welfare provisions, health provision in terms of the Factories Act or Mines Act or DOCW Act, and it also talks mainly on the working hours condition. You will not find working hours condition other than the regulatory act. Another important regulatory act is, since our subject itself a vendor compliance, Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970. So this regulates, abolishes engagement of contract workers in an industry, right? Then the next grouping is the wages related. Payment of Wages Act, Minimum Wages Act, and Payment of Bonus Act. Payment of Wages Act and minimum wages are directly applicable, and the vendor need to ensure the minimum wages notified for that industry in which he is engaged in the contract worker. Then the payment of wages talks about the time of payment and what are the deductions that are permissible. Then lastly, about the Payment of Bonus Act, every employer need to pay the bonus based on certain conditions in case if they are out of the infancy period and all. So contractors need to disperse the bonus yearly based on this profit. Only in this act, the principal employer may not have the direct or primary or secondary liability, because bonus is always based on the profit and loss of the immediate employer, in this case vendor. The third grouping is, and where one of the most important grouping is the social security. We are all here to ensure the last mile delivery to the workers. So here, when I say worker, it is a contract worker who need to be covered under the various available social security. Employees Compensation Act 1923, Employees State Insurance Act 1948, Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provision Act 1952, and Payment of Gratuity Act 1972. So first three, definitely principal employer is squarely responsible in case if the compliances are not ensured. And the last one, some of the court judgment like Chennai High Court on the Madras Fertilizer and all, they have slightly lashed the liability of gratuity of contract workers to the principal employer and they recover later from the contractor. So that part, if you leave, but the first three are very very important. That's the very reason we always say never engage a contract worker without them being covered under the PF or ESI. In case if the ESI is not notified to the particular industry, or if the person is above the ESI wage ceiling, then the Employee Compensation Act 1923. Another grouping is the women related. We all know that there are certain legislation which are available to take care of the women workers, like Maternity Benefit Act, Equal Remuneration Act, and the POSH Act. So the compliances need to be ensured under this act also. And the last one is, today we are in a country where the term labor is in the concurrent list of the Constitution. So when I say it is in the concurrent list, both the central and the state governments are empowered to make the legislation in terms of the labors. So in that scenario, when you cross from one state to another state, there are certain state-specific labor acts which are to be complied for the workers engaged in that particular state. So, namely, Industrial Establishment National and Festival Holidays Act, Labor Welfare Fund Act, Professional Tax Act. Like West Bengal and Maharashtra, you will find the HRA Act, Mathadi Act, and most importantly, in the Regulatory Act itself, we have seen it, Shops and Establishment Act. These acts are only state specific. Some of these acts, like NHFH Act and Labor Welfare Fund and Professional Tax, may not be available in all the states. So you need to check in which state you are going to have this operation, and whether these acts would be applicable to the contract laborers or not. You need to check. So these are the set of labor laws which are applicable to the vendors and through the vendors contract labors also. So vendor need to ensure the required compliance under all these labor legislations. In case the vendor is not ensuring, what would happen? We all know that there is a very important person who is known as the principal employer. So principal employer is squarely responsible to ensure the compliances of the vendor, like PF Act, ESA Act, EC Act. It has the primary liability, and here the Companies Act in 2013 was amended in the section 134. Subsection was brought in, wherein the directors of the companies have to provide and make a proper system to ensure compliances under all laws. So here it is not restricted to labor laws, it is inclusive of the labor laws. So when I say this, in case of the non-compliances of the vendor, who would be ultimately affected? It is the director of the company, because sometimes it can lead to the summons from the labor authority or PF and DSI. So director will have to settle this. So this is very important for all of you to know. Do not ignore the compliances in terms of the vendors also. So when I talk about the compliances, there are three stakeholders. One is the principal employer, which we have just seen. The second one is the contractors, and third one is the contract workman. There are certain compliances which are to be ensured by the principal employer for engaging the contractor, like amending the RC, issuing the notice, and Form 5, and the register maintenance, and certain returns. So when I come to the second stakeholder, and who is a very important stakeholder, is the contractor, who need to maintain various registers, and the PF, ESI need to be paid, and is paying for whom? The third important stakeholder is the contract workman. So every contract workman need to be covered and need to be paid with the minimum wages, need to be covered under the PF and ESI. So do not allow entry of the contract workman in case if they are not having the UAN and the ESIP. What would be the possible consequences in terms of the non-compliances? Certain points are given on your screen. Absorption of the contract labor. If you are not following the route of principal employer, there is a valid agreement between the contractor and the principal employer. The supervision, engagement of the contract workers, and the wages disbursement, PFESI coverage, leave sanctioning, work allotment, everything is done by the contractor. Contract workers are covered, paid by the contractor only. So if this route is properly followed, then there will not be any absorption. And in case if this is not proper, then there are various court judgment which can repose the liability on the principal employer, that can lead up to the absorption of the contract labor also. Fine and imprisonment of the directors, huge financial liability. We have seen with our experience so many employers who did not ensure the compliances in terms of the PF and the ESI minimum wages for the vendors, workers. They ended up in having the liability of hundreds of crores. Loss of image amongst the stakeholders, and loss of business as a whole, which we have seen in our snake and ladder slide. What I need to do in case if I wanted to engage the contractors, these are some of the best practices that we have noted down with our experience. Engagement of the contract labors form part of the settlement with the unions. So if you are having a unionized culture in your industry, please talk to your union, and make them convince them about the engagement of the contract workers, because they should not raise any objection. Social security coverage without exception. Even a single labor working for 1 hour, half an hour, 5 minutes inside the premises need to be covered under the social security. Then there are certain industry, in addition to the ESI coverage or the employee compensation coverage, they also go for a accident insurance coverage. It's an additional benefit. And the statutory audits are ensured by most of the industries. They engage a company like Aparajita for doing the audit. So these are all the points that are taken care during the audit, either by the internal audit team or by the external audit team like Aparajita. contractor wage register, PF remittance, ESA remittance, insurance coverage, any policy deviation, because every industry may have a well-knit policy which are applicable only to the industry. This way they have to come, this is the working hours condition, all these things. Excess over budget and numbers and costs, because today every industry will have to have a proper budget and they will have to confine themselves and operate within that budget. So while engaging the contract workers and all, a proper budgeting can be done because the wages are quite known based on the minimum wages. The budgeting can be certainly arrived at. RC and contractor license will be, I mean, auditing is being done on that. Whether the contractor's names are included in the RC by the principal employer, whether applicable contractor who are engaging the strength, crossing the threshold, or having the proper valid license or not. The agreement with the contractor or the purchase order issued to the contractor, which are valid, and the different working hours condition laid down under the regulatory acts are being followed or not. Contract laborers are engaged generally, with our experience, what we have seen it. And if you confine the engagement of the contract labor within this nature of work, then there will not be much problem. Please avoid engaging the contract workers in the core job for years and years and years. So housekeeping, material movement, loading, unloading, gardening, these are all the certain list of nature of work in which the vendors are engaged. Contract workmen are briefed on rules and safety. See, generally treat the contract workers for their safety, health, welfare at par with the direct employees. No doubt there will be a definite difference between the salary part amongst the contract workers and direct workers. Definitely, that cannot be matched. But all other conditions like the health, safety, welfare condition can be commonly ensured. Weekly safety training or conducted to contract workers because safety is paramount important for any principal employer and that is also applicable to the contract worker. Practice of absorbing suitable contract workmen against regular job. This is the only some of the practices, best practices followed. The last point is not mandatory. And first of all, you need to have a lot of caution before you exercise this last option. There should not be any direct, connectivity between the closure of contract workmen from the vendor and the next day is joining there. So there must be a proper procedure that can be followed. But first of all, if this point is available and informed to the vendors and through the vendors to the workers, at least they will have some motivation that one fine day I would become employee of this great company instead of working as a contract worker. So this is one of the motivational factors that can be seen by the contract workmen. So some of the best practices that we have seen it, which I'm suggesting that in your industry also you can try. Principal employer liability, we have seen some 13, 14 labor acts grouped under five major group. So primary responsibility to the principal employer and secondary responsibility, some of the labor acts does not suppose any liability on the principal employer. Like ESI, PF and employee compensation, it reposes the primary responsibility on the principal employer. In case if the contractor is not compliant, then the total responsibility, whatever it would be latched on to the principal employer. Payment of bonus, as I already explained, this is based on the profit of the employer. Here, the employer is vendor, so there will not be any liability latched on it. But it can create a certain IR issue. In case you can just practically think if 10 vendors are engaged and one of them is not paying the bonus, all other nine vendors are paid the bonus, then this can create a small ruckus inside the plant. That's the only reason today most of the industries they pay at least 8.33 percentage to the vendors as a part of the agreement itself. Payment of gratuity act, secondary or no liability. So I have written secondary because the Madras Court judgment is available as on date. Even when I go to the Kerala court, the judgment is opposite. So minimum wages act and the payment of wages act is secondary liability. The first payment of wages, minimum wages need to be done as a primary responsibility by the vendor only. In case if he is not paying, as per the section 21(4) of the Contract Labor Act, principal employer also would be responsible to disperse the wages and later we can recover from the contractor. So that is the, I put it as a secondary responsibility. Factories Act or Shops and Establishment Act, you can name any regulatory act here. Primary responsibility, as I said, these regulatory acts are ensuring the working hours condition, health, welfare, safety. So there cannot be any discrimination in this regard. So the principal employer will have the primary responsibility. Then other interstate micro and document secondary, industrial dispute, as I already explained, no liability, standing order, no liability, employment exchange, no liability, maternity benefit act, primary liability to the principal employer. So this will give you a certain idea for you to ensure the compliances when you are engaging vendors. General challenges that are being faced by the industry. Contractor manipulates records. So when he comes for the audit, or if the documents are produced to the labor authorities, the documents are improper and there is an evidence of manipulation. So it can repose a huge financial risk. Lack of simplified tech-enabled system to ensure compliances of the vendor. Today, in the big industries where hundreds of thousands of workers, contract workers are engaged, now if you are not having a technology to support, like we have a coffee product, coffee vendor, which will be taken care, explained by Mr. Guna. So if you are not having tech-enabled system for the audit and vendor management, then the manual process will only kill the time and which will not be foolproof. Exorbitant in-house team cost to regulate vendor compliance. So you need to, challenges is they need to engage a HR manager or the HR spark who is well versed with all the labor legislation so that he can at least monitor the contractors' compliances. Financial risk for the company due to vendor non-compliance, which we have seen in our previous slides also. I was explained about the effect of the non-compliances. One of the effect is the huge financial liability. Lack of internal expertise to regulate. Most of the industries, they lack the labor laws experience. They are not having a solid person who has a very detailed, thorough knowledge on the labor laws. So he can only ensure the compliances. He can only advise the vendors. So that lack of internal expertise is visible as a challenge that we have observed. Lack of compliance orientation. For them, the business growth is prime important, and they are just not bothered about the compliances. Is this is the lack of compliance orientation, then it can repose a very big risk to the principal employer. Disintegration between the operation and very various other internal departments. In big industries where 5,000, 10,000 contract workers are engaged, some of the industries that we have seen it, the department directly engage the contractors and through them the vendor contract workers are engaged. HR department, personal department may not be even aware. So this is another challenge because any inspection from the government authority or the audit team, whether it is internal audit or corporate audit, they will only come and discuss with the HR department. If they are not aware about the engagement of the vendors and contract workers, then the compliances cannot be ensured. Having seen the challenges, some of the problems that are faced by the different industries. Some of you are having a pan India setup. You are having your establishment or factories across the country in various states, and you engage various vendors. Sometimes the same vendor in all the plants or different vendors. You need to comply with the different locations specific labor legislation. Like when you come to the Tamil Nadu, zone-wise, panchayat, town-wise, the professional tax slab changes. And as I explained earlier, the state-wise, the regulations are also changing, dealing with the different statutory authorities or certain problems faced by the some of the industries with, in our experience that we have captured, leading to an unorganized and unstructured work. Compliant process goes for a toss if not properly streamlined. Then unable to clear the payment to the vendors because some of the industries they have the payment system wherein for every job the vendors are submitting the invoice. So there is no track of job versus the compliance activities. Currently, they are facing the difficulty in tracking the invoice for the multiple vendors, and some of the industries are PO based. So for every PO, they wanted an invoice, whereas the contract would be having 10 or more POs. So how to regulate this? How to connect this with the engagement of the contract workers? This is seen as another challenges. Then what it can lead legal implication on the principal employer, liability in multi crores, freezing of bank accounts in case if the PFESI are not paid. These authorities can even go for to the extent of freezing your bank accounts. And the PFESI inspection has always become a boardroom worry Today, the PF department can come and ask for the document even for 10 years, 15 years before. At least the ESI inspection can be limited to 5 years. Then the codes are implemented. Then both the PF and ESI would have the 5 years as a inspection period. Inspection is not in favor of the principal employer because that is the non-compliance is being observed. And in terms of the liability, it can lead to the damages, interest, then the contribution, difference in the contribution. All this, would create a huge financial liability. And lastly, the working hours condition. As I said, Regulatory Act talks about the working hours condition. If they are not followed, if the people have done the OT, including the contract workers, if the wages are not paid at the double the rate, then that's the non-compliances. So the proper monitoring of the workforce entering into the premises and the proper bookkeeping is also another mandatory requirement. This are the some of the problems faced. I've come to the solution in detail. Mr. Guna would be explaining. So we have a product, a Comfy Vendor Audit, which is a SaaS platform. So that can trigger the task and the vendors can be asked to upload the document. As soon as the vendor completes, our expert audit team will do the audit and they can issue the compliance certificate. The compliance certificate can be issued to a vendor or each of the month. It can be sent through the mail to the different stakeholders in the industry, including your finance people, so that the invoices can be cleared based on the compliance certificate. The compliance certificate plays a vital role in terms of the where they are complied and what is the penalty that need to be because some of the industries even for delay in PF remittance or ESA remittance, even if they have remitted the damages and interest, but they have the practice of deterring the contractor with some penalty clause. So those things also can be customized in our Comfy tool. So thank you very much for your patient hearing, and it's over to Mr. Guna. In case of any questions that you have, you can always ping in the chat box, as Mr. Faisal mentioned. There will be a session at the last. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Over to Mr. Guna. Guna, you're on mute. Seems.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Guna. I handle or I head the design and implementation of our beautiful system, Comfy. So we rightly saw, engaging contractors in an organization gives a whole lot of business advantage, but also the compliance framework is pretty tricky. So we feel that this system, Comfy Vendor, is going to add a whole lot of value to you in efficiently handling the end-to-end process of vendor compliance management. So we are in the market for the past 20 years. So we have gone through every single process. We actually do vendor audit every single month. And today our strength is we handle about 6 million contractors and contract labors records. We audit it and we thoroughly scrutinize them. So we have developed a technology so that is going to drive this entire vendor compliance management process. So we have got all the nuances are like converted into the features of this application, like precisely mapping. For example, vendors working in multiple locations, one vendor for a principal employer working in multiple locations of theirs, or if multiple vendors are working for a particular location. That way all this mapping is made available in the system. Secondly, each principal employer would wanted to have a customized audit checklist for each one of them. So we also do that customization process. And some organizations would wanted to have this audit process only for the critical items, the financial or the crucial task items which a vendor is supposed to do if they are skipping it or not. So checking those critical items. And to our experience, we also see a whole lot of, to a certain amount of vendors are also non-cooperative, or some cases they also tend to manipulate the compliance records to have a check on that. So we have developed a technology. So that technology is completely automizing. It's going to completely automate the vendor audit process. So once the implementation of this application is done, I'll show it to you here. So once the organization hands over the, identifies the vendors whom they have entrusting their business activities. The system will capture all the compliance activity that they must do. So this set of checklists is validated or authenticated from the principal employer, and that is being mapped into the system. So only this part, only the implementation part, hardly a week's time to configure about 500 contractors for organization. So in that 1 week, we configure it. From that point onwards, the system will be in completely auto mode. The system will help the vendors what are the compliance activities that they must comply. The system will automatically trigger the contractors when they have to do it. For example, the PF, they have to pay it on 15th. The ESI 15th, the registers, records, whatever thing, the system will notify to them from this portal itself, also to their registered email IDs and to their mobile applications. So that way, the system will act as a kind of a personal assistant to the vendors. Even if the vendor does not have compliance knowledge, the system will give all the formats of the compliance activity. So the system will trigger them, and the system will follow up and give multiple reminders, and the system will push and give the format and push and collect that compliance record back from the vendor. So the vendor, all they have to do is just go and upload the documents into the system, and the system will automatically audit all the compliance records and give a report or in a way of certificate to the vendor as well as to the principal employer. So that way, the principal employer can have an extra check on the vendors on a monthly basis. I would like to show this in the live platform for you. So I hope you can continue to see my screen. So this is a login of a principal employer. So I'll just see how the statutory settings are being done. So I go to the transaction, I do the statutory setting activity. So all the vendors of this particular sample company is listed here. So it is listed here. For example, the vendor code one with particular company name. So there's a manpower consultancy and a transport company. There are multiple vendors being engaged by this organization. I'll open up a sample one. So this transport vendor are supposed to do compliance under all these acts. For example, like contract labor, CLRA, PF, ESI, all this. So we will tell these are the activities to be done. The description is given, and we will tell this is the audit checklist item, and we also classify based on the criticality. For example, if you see anything in any other classification, yeah. So if you see A, B, C, A being highly critical, it's going to bring heavy penalties or imprisonment chances sometimes. B being moderate and C being least. So that way, we will configure it act by act, task by task, and we submit it. As soon as we submit it, from this lock open position, it will be locked. So this is all the part of the implementation process. Right from this part, this entire vendor compliance management is going to be on the auto configuration mode. So the vendors, all they have to do is just go and pull and upload and complete the compliance activity. So now I'll go to the vendor login. So this is a vendor login, and they go have this easy upload option. So vendor logs in here. In one click, he comes in and he will see a real-time calendar available for him. So he'll see for the month of May, June, April, whatever months. And if he clicks a particular month, all the task items that he's supposed to comply will be listed. All he has to do is click here, upload the compliance proof document. For example, I upload this, and then I give a submit. So this is all I would be doing. So like this, I'll complete multiple task items and I give a submit. So vendors activities are very, very, very simple. They go upload and give a submit option, submit button. So as soon as they submit the compliance activity, the system will automatically audit the records of the vendor and give a dashboard. I'm coming back to the principal employees login. The system will give a real-time status where exactly the compliance status of those multiple vendors are. So this is a dashboard of the principal employer. So all the vendors put together, this is their real-time status as of now. So green being the ones that are being completed on time, by variety of vendors. Blue being the one that are delayedly done. That could be a statutory due date, and this particular activity has been done after the due date. Yellows are the one like the vendors are still in the progress of doing it and they have time. Reds are the one the vendors have actually missed it to do. So if you'd be wondering, all the vendors are put together, this is a consolidated status. If you wish to download it vendor by vendor, location by location, you have that option too. So you have a filter option on the right top corner. You go to the vendors, you select any particular vendor or multiple vendors. For example, a RAM transport. I go click in. So from the consolidated view of all the compliance items of multiple vendors, this RAM transport is supposed to do 15 tasks, and all 15 he has submitted it on time. So that way I'll also be able to see what is the status of each contract. So if I want to know what are the 22 tasks which are being missed out by those vendors, all I do is just click on the the red area. It will list out which contractor it is, under which act, what task has been missed, and how many days they have missed. So every single task item, black and white, the principal employer will have a thorough study or thorough update on real-time basis. For example, here the manpower consultancy. So this particular consultant, a vendor, is missed out 3 tasks under the CLRA Contractor Labor Management Act, and that should have been done 8 days before. Still, this particular task is not yet completed. So that way, the system will give a black and white update to the principal employer. And I'll also show you how the system helps, the vendor. So this way they upload it, and the vendors will also have a real-time dashboard for them. So each vendor, they can also see, in a graphical representation, what are the items they have done, what are the items they are pending, what is they are supposed to do it, and what are the items they have missed out to do. So that way, the system will help on the transactional activity. So all those compliance items, what they're supposed to do, and triggering, helping them, the vendors to do it, following it up the vendor. If a vendor is missing out the deadline, reminding them, and collecting the documents and saving it in the safe repository for the next 7 years. So all the compliance records of every contractor is being audited in the system is being saved for the next 7 years. Assume a situation if a vendor is discontinued to the principal employer and inspection happens after 2 years. The principal employer is finding it very difficult without a system like this. So they're not able to showcase the document proof for a contractor they have engaged 2 years. So a system like this will have the repository of all the contractors, and anytime any internal or external or a government official audit happens, they can pull out and complete the audit process. So we'll come back to the presentation. So as soon as the activity, the vendors complete the task item and that is being automatically audited, the system will have this option for the principal employer. They just give the email IDs of whoever the recipients of the certificate. So automatically to all these people, the compliance certificate of any particular vendor will be mailed to them in auto mode. So there is absolutely no manual activity. Only thing is the vendor will pull and complete the task by the manual process. Right from there, everything is automated. So they give the email IDs, all these people will be given send the certificate. And if a vendor would wish to add his invoice also, sometimes the vendors are also finding it difficult to submit the invoices attaching the compliance certificate. So these two things go, on its own. They are distinctly managed by the principal employer, which is kind of creating confusion to the many of the principal employers. So here, the vendors will have the certificates ready as soon as they complete the compliance activity. They can go to a tab like this, key in, attach the invoice. The certificate is automatically attached to it. They just key in the invoice, their own invoice number, the invoice date, and attach the invoice copy. Here, there is a certification that is automatically getting generated, and whatever invoice the vendor would wish to raise it to the principal employer is also attached in the same portal. So that way, the principal employer can manage the entire life cycle of a contractor in this own very application itself. So this is how the certificates can be viewed. I'll show you a sample certificate. So here it's like one of the sample certificate clearly describing what for which vendor it is, for which principal employer legal entity it is, which month's audit it is, and what and all the compliance activities that are being completed by the vendor. So here's a sample of 2. on ideal case, that might be 20, 30, 40 set of compliance task items a vendor would be doing every month. So that will be listed here. And system will also automatically generate this on this particular task has been, certificate has been generated on 8th of June. And it is automatically, authorized by the auditors of Aparajita. So that way, it is also doubly checked before any such certificate is auto-generated. So that way, the principal employers are rest assured that the compliance certificate is from a premium audit partner. So here inside the system, if a vendor or a principal employer would wish to download the certificate, that is also possible. So two-way the certificate goes, one is on the auto email or inside the portal, all those certificates will be archived. Anytime they wish, they can go and download a certificate for the past 7 years. And Comfy Vendor is one such module of our overall Comfy application. So here, Comfy Vendor is managing entirely the vendor compliance management. Likewise, we also have something called Comfy Litigation. This litigation is an out-and-out litigation management system, starting from an inspection from an authority to a Supreme Court case. Any type the case may be, a high court hearing, the litigation is raised by the company or raised against the company, authority summon, court summon, any such litigation. This has got a unique feature. The system will capture those documents automatically and automatically notify the respective stakeholders to respond to those litigation. And it also captures the attorney details, the opposition party attorney details. That way, it gives a whole lot of projection of the litigation status right across the layers of the organization, from the top premium or the elite layer, like the chief executive officers of the company, till the executives who are responsible to complete this litigation. It is completely access controlled and it gives a whole lot of visibility in managing the litigation. For example, some big conglomerates like, especially companies working in the FMCG industry, they day in and day out, they get a whole lot of, litigations, getting slapped against them. So this kind of system would efficiently track it and it helps them to manage those litigation in a successful manner. And then a Comfy audit module, a complete bespoke audit platform. So a principal employer can comfortably select what are the task items. For example, a third-party auditor would wish to audit a kind of a company, so they can select the compliance activity, checklist can be mapped, and the auditors can complete the entire audit process remotely. So they create the task, and then whoever is responsible to complete this audit process, they upload the task items, and then every bit of this audit process is completed in virtual format. And we also have something called a Comfy Law, which is not for profit. This is an open source platform available in the market today. So this is to showcase our knowledge strength. So this platform has got all the legislation that are enacted in this country that is governing compliances. So it is automatically bifurcated into various domains like the labor compliances, industrial compliances, the financial, the corporate, commercial. That way, it is automatically, it's already classified, and you get to have the latest legislations with all the latest amendments, circulars, notifications, anything that is happening or anything that is getting changed in the compliance forum. It is auto updated in this application or in this portal within 24 to 48 hours timeline. And the additional key feature this system also has is the High Court and the Apex Court judgments are also captured. So that way, anyone who wish to know or would want to have a knowledge update or would wish to gain knowledges in the compliance framework, they can get into this portal. And finally, we also have something called as a ComfyPay, an out-and-out payroll processing platform, right from capturing the attendance to the payroll process and to the disbursement of wages. So that way, this Comfy application has got multiple modules to deliver compliance comfort to the principal employer. So the principal employer handling their own compliances can use the system, or the principal employer managing vendors or litigation. Every bit of requirement of a company to operate their business in India, there are a whole lot of compliances they must do. So this one application can efficiently, or a technology that solves their compliance issues. So when we talk about compliances, it is very, very confidential and the crucial documents are to be maintained. So when a system that tracks and helps the organization to manage those compliance framework, it is very important for the data security to also be given highest importance. So this application has got all possible certifications to get to showcase its the confidentiality strength. So it follows the European standards of data security, like having the single sign-on or multi-factor authentications or IP-based restrictions or geography-based restrictions, and it is completely access controlled. So this system can fit any organization, any hierarchy in the organization. So the system is used by big conglomerates having 100 plus businesses having 10,000 plus branches in this country. And the same application is able to serve the compliance requirements of a startup with just 5-10 employees. So that way, the client need not to fit to the system, but the system is developed in such a way that the system will fit to the any company comfortably, and it will help them to manage their compliance. And this is completely on the cloud platform. You don't have to have any system requirements or any such things. It works as similar to that of your Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. Every user will have their unique username credentials. They log in, they'll be able to track the compliances. The executors will be able to complete the compliance items. The middle management will help will be able to have a regular check on the compliances by the way of approvals, and the senior management will have a complete visibility of the compliances through various charts, reports, and all that. So that way, what we try to achieve is that 20 years of compliance execution, what we did it on ground has been transformed to the system, and the USP what we got is the complete automation. So entirely it is system driven, and the system takes care of your compliance. And to appreciate our process, the Mirror Review has awarded Comfy as one of the top 10 GRC solution providers. The CII has awarded or recognized Comfy as one of the top 25 innovative organizations in India. And the CIO Review has awarded Comfy as one of the top 20 most promising GRC solution providers across the world. And Comfy also had partnered with the premium forums or elite associations in India like ESI, EFSI, FICCI, AIMA, CII kind of forums. And this is a brief introduction of our application. If any one of you would wish to have a detailed demo of this, if in the interest of time, I try to keep it as brief as it is possible. If anyone would wish to have a detailed demo of this application, maybe we can have a connect one-on-one and do a full presentation showcasing you the full strength of this application and how this application can efficiently manage your company's compliance. Thank you very much. And I hope the forum is open for the questions. So please feel free to ask any technical question related to this application or any legal question where our legal expert would be able to help you out in clarifying your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Guna. Really appreciate your detailed insight into how Comfy really works. Actually, we've got a few questions right now from the audience. So this is addressed, I believe, to Mr. Ramachandran. All these rules are applicable to not-for-profit organizations, and do they come under Shops and Establishments Act?
I guess I believe it's a legal question.
Yeah, it's a legal question, Sir Ramachandran, sir. Yeah.
If the vendors are engaged in a place where the principal employer is having a shop or establishment registered under the respective state S&D Act, then certainly the vendor need to follow that.
Thank you, sir. I believe
this is one of the regulatory act, as I said, the Factories Act or S&D Act or Mines Act. So all the conditions laid down, working hours condition, leave provisions of shops and establishment would be applicable to the vendors employees also.
We have another legal question. Why principal employer is not liable for bonus to contractual manpower, whereas the LIs ask for it every time?
Okay. I don't know why LIs are asking for it. They must be asking from the vendor, not definitely from the principal employer, because the bonus is calculated based on the profit and loss of the employer. Here, the employer for the worker is contractor. So every contractor may have a different profit annotation based on their P&L statement. So there is a judgment from the Karnataka High Court related to HUL wherein the different vendors can pay the different percentage of the bonus. Obviously, the profit from one vendor to another vendor differs, right? But
Hmm.
as I said, though it is not having any direct liability to the principal employer, it can create a ruckus. There are 10, 15 vendors engaged in the industry where, except one or two, all are paid the bonus. The persons who are engaged by those vendors who have not received the bonus may create a certain issue, right? To avoid that, the principal employer is paying around 8.33% to the vendor, so that 8.33 can be dispersed to the workers also. So that is a practice. But when you say legally, principal employer is not liable
Not
for
liable.
the vendor's employees bonus.
Okay. Um, we have another legal question. One thing which goes into the PE way is that the contractual employee is not the direct employee of the PE.
Certainly, as long as the route is followed, that is, there is a valid agreement or PO between the vendor and principal employer. His name is included in the RC. Supervision and everything is taken care by the vendor only, and
Mhm.
the job is taken care by the vendor or vendor supervisor. Principal employer is not having any direct control on the workers. Then this route is good, and it doesn't have any. They are the workers of the vendors, not the workers of principal employer.
Principal employer. Okay. Mr. Guna, I have a technical question. Will you be able to provide compliance certificate as an acknowledgement for completion of compliance activities?
Yes, certainly that is auto-generated. So right after this vendors upload the documents of, when, for example, for the month of May, for example, we are in the starting of June. So whatever compliances they must have completed for the month of May, they upload it. So each task will be listed for the vendors. They upload they complete the task items, and
Mhm.
automatically the audit happens, and the system automatically generates the certificates, and it sends it, to the vendors, to the principal employer, whoever is controlling the vendor, who is overseeing the vendor. I wouldn't rather call it as a controlling, who was interested in the contractor's compliance status. So that system will, all we have to do is key in the email IDs of those individuals. The system will automatically send a certificate to those respective individuals.
Okay. I have another technical question. Can the vendor raise invoice to principal employer through this compliance management platform?
Absolutely. So the system has that capability too. So it is not just a compliance management system. So whenever most of the principal employers are interested to receive the invoices from the vendor only when they are compliant, only when they're, for the month's compliances are completed. So initially it was two distinct items. Before technology was involved, they get to, or audit, they get their compliances audited, and then they attach it, and then they send it manually. So here the system automatically completes the audit process, and all the vendor have to do is, in whatever month, for the month of May, the certificate is already ready for them as soon as they come, as long as they have completed the task, and they can just attach the invoice. This will also go to the principal employer or to the finance team of the principal employer, where they will be able to see both these certificate as well as the invoice sent by the vendor in one single, email or one single window. So there they'll be able to immediately process their invoices. That way, the system also got that, has increased the efficiency or the payment start for the vendors. So before, even when we did our audit process manually, it took about 15 days. Now the clearing of invoice to the vendors happens in just 1 day, because that system that drives this entire process.
Hmm. Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Ramachandran sir, there's a legal question. If bonus is not even secondary liability, why principal employees should pay bonus to contract employees? As mentioned, bonus is based on profits of the establishment, contractor. How it is related to principal employer?
Principal employer need not to pay bonus to the contract workers directly, right?
Hmm.
Only to avoid any sort of IR issues, strike or something disturbances, principal employer pays 8.33 percentage to the vendors. But legally, it is not mandatory. Only the vendors are supposed to disperse the bonus based on their profit, which can be either minimum 8.33 or it can go up to the maximum of 20. Nowhere principal employer is liable.
Hmm. Thank you, sir. Another legal question. whether the state legislations like PT and LWF are primary responsibility of the PE or the contractor. Also, is there even a secondary responsibility on the same?
In many states, it is not, but we have to see state-wise in case in the employee or employer definition, they have latched any responsibility to the principal employee. Otherwise, in general, PT and LWF, it is not the responsibility of the principal employee.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Guna, there's a technical question. What is the difference between Comfy vendor and Comfy audit?
Comfy vendor is we being the expert in the compliance industry. So we would tell the principal employer, hey, you have engaged these many contractors. And for example, in multiple locations, I'll take example of Chennai, Bangalore, and Mumbai. So we will tell the principal employer, or we would guide the principal employer, this is the checklist that has to be audited. The checklist is fixed as per the statutory framework. So we being the compliance expert, we would tell this task, this checklist has to be audited, and that is being approved by the principal employer. This is one. So this is about compliance vendor, where the vendors will upload those compliance tasks, they complete the compliance task items, and that is being audited automatically. So the Comfy audit module is a complete bespoke audit platform. For example, that could be a audit partner for the for the organization. So he would be seated out of Singapore or anywhere in the world or anywhere in India, wanted to audit certain compliances or non-compliance records of a company. So here, the auditor will give the checklist. That checklist item is imbibed into this technology, so that the organization will submit their response in the technology, so that the auditor sitting remotely or virtually can complete the audit and generate the certificate of this audit process. So Comfy audit is more of a non-statutory process of auditing, and Comfy vendor is more of very particular to the vendors they've engaged and the statutory requirements that the principal employer must follow.
Thank you, Mr. Guna. Ramachandran sir, another question.
Yes.
In case the contractor do not have PF ESIC registration, what is the way to ascertain compliance is established at construction site?
Okay. First point is to engage those contractors who have this registration PF or ESI. In case if you already engaged and if they do not have, it is for the principal employer to pay the PF ESI in their own code. Because as I said in my slides also, principal employer is having the primary responsibility in terms of the PF and ESI. So either one option, you engage only those people who are having the PF and ESI code, or you cover them in your own code. Just by covering the vendor workers for the PF and ESI in the principal employer code, no vendor employee can seek the permanency. Because the law is very, very clear. Principal employer is primarily responsible to ensure PF and ESI compliance, not only for the direct employees, for the vendor employees also. So this is fulfilling the obligation in covering those vendor employees in his own code. Absolutely, there's no problem.
Okay. This another legal question. In case of fatal accident, who will send the accident report?
If it is a regulatory act, it is the principal employer, like a Factories Act or Mines Act or DOCW Act, right? And if it is ESI, the vendors are covered under the ESI code of the vendors. Vendor employees are covered under the vendors ESI code. Then vendor need to send the accident report under the ESI and the EC.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Guna, I have a couple of technical questions here.
Yep.
Will we be able to access and fetch the uploaded documents at a later point of time for audit or inspection?
Absolutely. So that is also completely access controlled. One of the most key USP of this application is the records repository. So this system archives the compliance records of the vendors for the next 7 years. So you just go click the month, that month's compliances records, whatever PF challans, ESI challans, the registers records the vendor submitted. All these are archived. Whoever is having access to it can go and download it. For example, a HR manager who's controlling all the contractors of a particular state like Karnataka. So he would be given for that access. He can go and click and download it. Someone who's handling the entire country, he will be given the complete access. To answer the question directly, yes, it will be archived, and whoever is having access, they can go and download it any point in time. We have even the authorities are, the government officials are completing their audit from this technology platform itself. They just ask for a particular vendors, May to next year April records. They just fetch it on the screen, and when even the government officials complete the audit in the system itself.
Thank you for that. We'll come up to the last question of the session. I think it's addressed to Ramachandran sir. Dues of exited contractors in case of PF, ESIC dues and liabilities are to be settled. However, the employee details are not available and the contractor is not traceable. How to settle the dues and liabilities to avert any future liability as a PE?
So this itself a problem because the auditing was not done and the complaints was not ensured by the principal employer when the vendors were engaged. This is the very core of this particular section. At least now this must be ensured by all the participants who are now in this. Coming to the question, we have to approach the respective PFESI office and seek their support for depositing through the miscellaneous challan. Because directly you cannot generate the challan without UAN and ESI IP. Because for generating the UAN, you need the individual details and Aadhaar. For ESI IP, you need in these details. So once this is not possible, as the vendors have already been terminated and vendor employees are not traceable, so you have to approach the PFESI as a good Samaritan employer and seek their support for generating the miscellaneous challan and deposit the quantum itself. Anyhow, it would be caught during the later inspection.
Okay. Just one last question that came in the last minute over here. Whether OT is eligible?
OT is eligible for what?
I think
contract workers. Yeah, contract workers are like direct employees. Working hours conditions are applicable to the contract workers also. So they are also eligible for overtime wages, which is normally at the double the ordinary rate of wages. In our colloquial terms, that's double of the gross.
Over here, we come to an end of our session. Thank you so much, Ramachandran sir, and thank you, Mr. Guna, for coming on to this risk and compliance webinar and giving in your detailed knowledge and expertise from your end. And thank you all the attendees for staying with us from the last 60 minutes and going through our risk and compliance webinar. I hope this was knowledgeable enough and we were able to answer all the questions that has been posed from your end. If any further questions, we will definitely address them through mail, and we will come to an end of the session right now. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you. Namaste.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
In today's business scenario, as organizations re-strategize to improve profitability, one of the biggest challenges is achieving 100% regulatory compliance. The major hurdles faced are the vastness and complexity of standards, continuous amendments to regulatory compliance laws, and lack of robust digital tools. Besides, non-compliance may lead to legal exposure and prosecution of the board of directors. This can result in heavy fines and penalties and a drop in market value and share prices. Now companies can tackle these challenges with Comfy, a tech-enabled plug-and-play global compliance management system with regulatory compliance advisor. Comfy is a product of Aparajita Group of companies, the #1 regulatory compliance company in India, offering solutions across key domains. Comfy is the only global compliance management system that enables companies to track, govern, and manage regulatory requirements, performance evaluations, and internal operations, thereby mitigating future risks. Comfy provides full regulatory compliance assurance and precise knowledge mapping with real-time updates. The technology is embedded with comprehensive legal knowledge and assists in mapping industry-specific laws with a host of other key features. A key highlight of Comfy is tracking regulatory compliance performance with a multi-dimensional dashboard for management review. This helps companies act proactively and reduces financial risks and liability costs, leading to improved stock value and customer trust. Some of the key USPs of Comfy are as follows. Comfy dynamically drives and manages regulatory compliance performance with auto-trigger, tracking, and escalating of regulatory compliance gaps. Comprehensive regulatory compliance knowledge covers all types and categories regulatory knowledge for effective compliance management globally. Easy-to-use intelligent, real-time, and color-coded dashboard and trend charts with drill-down capabilities. Timely auto-updates with notifications and comprehensive reporting and alert system. Automated and on-demand analytics and reporting capabilities available to flag non-compliance and risk. Comfy's readily available reports can be used for internal and external audit, gap assessment, and due diligence analysis. It supports in identifying risks and allows for a proper mitigation system to be set in place to avoid non-compliance. Mobile apps. Comfy is available on iOS and Android-based mobile apps to manage your regulatory compliance while you're on the go. Dedicated data server with AWS that acts as a repository for historic organizational data that serves as comprehensive databank of regulatory compliance documents. With its applicability across 100+ industries, regulatory compliance management becomes effortless with Comfy. Comfy's robust inbuilt mechanism ensures continuity and visibility of regulatory compliance in companies across the world. Apart from catering to various domains and modules, it can also be customized to suit specific needs. Let's take a quick look at Comfy's interface and usability. Comfy suggests applicable statutes for every branch of the organization, along with instant updates on new regulations and any changes. It customizes regulatory compliance assignment to users. Regulatory compliance tasks are allotted to a set of users who play the role of maker and checker for completion and approval of tasks respectively. Comfy tells a user on what, when, and how for completing any activity. Tasks are automatically triggered with adequate legal information, made available for accomplishing any activity with ease. An approval mechanism to verify and validate all tasks ensures a foolproof system. Upon task approval, the updated regulatory compliance status reflects in the dashboard in real time for comprehensive tracking. It really is that simple. Next is the dashboard feature, which provides a bird's-eye view of the regulatory compliance status, improving transparency and accountability levels across the organization. With its inbuilt report engine and extensive reports, Comfy acts as regulatory compliance repository and can retrieve data that dates back to 7 years. Needless to say, it is designed at par with industry standards. With Comfy, regulatory compliance management is now accurate and hassle-free. Reach out to us for a free demo. Comfy, your compliance selfie. In today's business scenario,